Okay, so it kind of sucks that I have to make this clear before I begin this so-called review, or at least discussion that I'm about to have, that, you know, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. No opinion is necessarily wrong, and with talking about a film like Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, I think it's important just to put that out there, because there is a massive amount of people out there that dislike the film, and while I do happen to be on the opposite side of those people, there are people that do like the film as well, and you're not necessarily wrong for doing either. You're entitled to, you know, feel about a film in a certain way, and I'm not coming from the perspective that I get nostalgic about The Phantom Menace, or that I get nostalgic about the Star Wars franchise, that I'm going to love or hate any particular installment. I wanted to watch it, you know, of course it's hard to watch just as a Star Wars film and just as a standalone film, but I did my best to really do that, to really revisit it for the first time since I started reviewing films a few years ago, hopefully thinking my mindset and perspective might have changed and that I might, you know, fall under that popular opinion, but that's really not the case, and I'm absolutely fine with that. But while I will address some of the problems I have, I'm here to talk about why I actually enjoy The Phantom Menace. Sure, I will admit that opening crawl is something that just put me off in terms of it not being necessarily relevant. It sets the backdrop of things that are taking place, but doesn't really have a lot of repercussions for the larger storyline, so I kind of was able to ignore it somewhat. Sure, there are a few convenient issues when you talk about, say, them being underwater in the Gungan Bongo and the fish just eating the bigger fish and being rather unnecessary. There is, however, a lot of things, even in that moment, that I really liked. That there's some essence of foreshadowing that takes place with there always being a bigger fish. Something that takes place in the prequel trilogy and in that film alone as well, with regards to the Emperor, with regards to Darth Maul, with regards to the threat of the Sith alone. The film does a fantastic job of foreshadowing throughout, I will give it that. It's also pretty well paced in my opinion. There are just a short 50 scenes that every Star Wars film has. It's constructed into 50 different scenes, including the end credits, so technically 49. And I think The Phantom Menace does a good job in terms of being really well and consistently paced, not really dipping in terms of the speed and the pacing of the film. Not so much the tension either, minus maybe a moment here or there towards the first act of the film. Now, moving on, I want to talk about, yes, of course, every Star Wars film is chronological, and it does a good job of keeping up with that chronology, having a very, you know, A to B to C kind of flow, and doing it well, in my opinion. I think within the smaller storyline when they land on Tatooine, with the pod race, with them going back, with them fighting against the Separatists and the Republic and everything, it's just, it flows really well and really consistently, and even though some moments are slower, I managed to just enjoy them. And in fact, you know, I was a little bit engrossed in everything going on. While people do complain about the politics, I didn't think there was a whole lot of that, to be honest, in the film. There are a lot of other elements focused on. There's, of course, this smaller story of this child who, yes, while I will admit, some of the portrayals of the actors, particularly Natalie Portman and Jake Lloyd, are not the best. Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, and Ian McDermott pull off nothing short of fantastic performances in this film, and I was really attached to the human characters in this film in terms of what was going on. Obi-Wan's reluctance towards the end at first to go against the Jedi Order to train Anakin, but at the same time, his reluctance to go against his own master, just something very subtly portrayed. The relationship he has with Qui-Gon is really well put on screen as well, and I really felt the Master and Padawan relationship they had and the friendliness that they had developed. Even though we hadn't necessarily seen a lot of that, we were thrown straight into it, and I think they did a good job of establishing the fact that it has been around for a long time. However, that smaller storyline I was talking about is that of a slave child who has this special quality about him. And yes, while it is midichlorians and it is something that does tick off a lot of fans, it's something that doesn't necessarily bring the film to a crashing blow or anything like that. For me, it's a minor problem at most, and I think that having this small storyline of this slave child, it feels Spielbergian to some end, for lack of a better word, where, you know, the odds are stacked against you, but it's that will that you have, and for example, in the pod race, where his pod racer's not working at first, he pushes forth, he's the unlikely hero, to overcome all that he is thrown into, but he does so. And I actually liked seeing Anakin sort of have to overcome the difficulties of his life, overcome his situation, and even him leaving his mother with the whole "will I ever see you again" bit. It was really hard to witness and to take in that there is this child who's going to be taken on this incredible galactic adventure, and it's something he's never seen before. Very similar to Luke Skywalker, very poetic in some sense in terms of the similarity that it has, but at the same time, it's going to be something that does have a certain new flair about it, which I was excited to see and which I thought was decently executed. I'm not going to say this is a perfect film, don't get me wrong, but it's a film that really, you know, apart from Jar Jar Binks, which I will talk about right now, it does, of course, foreshadow a lot of things with the idea of a storm coming, with the fact that, you know, Anakin believes no one can kill a Jedi, and his, of course, Qui-Gon Jinn's death, and Anakin's later metaphorical death of, you know, him dying as a Jedi and turning into a Sith, and those being elements and themes that are, you know, slowly introduced and well introduced to the film. I think the very basic story of the film is interesting. While yes, when expanded with bits of dialogue here and there that aren't necessarily thoroughly appealing, it does detract from what could have been a much greater story. And yes, while I do agree that the film has massive potential that it doesn't fulfill, it doesn't mean that it is far, far, far away from doing a great job. I think that the film itself does a great job. But technically, of course, I believe this is the part that has the least argument, but whether it's the original score, whether it's the set designs that are gorgeous, even the cinematography, which tends to go unnoticed in this film, I think there's a lot to love about the Phantom Menace. And yes, as I was talking about Jar Jar Binks earlier, I mean, he detracts a lot from what takes place. He's very unnecessary. He's there in the background, just doing weird things, sort of faffing around for no reason, sort of removing and detracting from what's taking place at the forefront of the story. However, you know, while yes, I will admit I really did not like that, it doesn't take away entirely of the story that's still taking place. It didn't necessarily, you know, remove me completely from the film, although I will admit it is a completely unnecessary element. Moving on, though, I do want to talk about the pod race. It's something that a lot of people complain about, but I feel it's something that actually expanded the universe of Star Wars so much, expanded Tatooine itself a lot. It gave this whole new flavor, this whole new vibe to that sort of dearth and filthiness of Tatooine, and this whole idea of entertainment through dangerous racing and stuff like that was something very interesting to see, and something that I thought was very, very well shot, was intense, and once again, one of the more incredibly visually stunning sequences of the film. Of course, even that first duel that Qui-Gon has with Darth Maul is something that happens really quickly. It's really short, but it does have a good amount of build-up, and of course, just really builds up to the final duel that I'll get to in a moment. However, I do still want to talk about the Sith for a minute. Yes, while I could talk about the love story that was planted rather weirdly, to be honest, I will admit that the introduction and the return of the Sith, along with the political introduction as well, was something really well done. Ian McDiarmid is fantastic in this film, and there is this moment at the end of the film that I really want to get to that has this, it's mind-boggling how heavy that moment is at the funeral of Qui-Gon, wherein they talk about who died, the Jedi, or the Padawan, or the student or the master, or something along those lines, and the student, the apprentice. That's right, the student, the apprentice, and I think that has like all more than just a double meaning. Of course, while you could take it literally that when they're talking about the Sith, that was Darth Maul, the student was Darth Maul, the apprentice. Then there's that brief focus on Ian McDiarmid, fantastically done, plotting elements and seeds for the future. At the same time, it has a lot of relevance to Obi-Wan's character, whether, you know, while yes, Qui-Gon Jinn did technically die, was it the student who's gonna die on the inside now? Has that crushed him yet, or will he in the future be able to overcome that? get over it and move on. And I think that there are a lot of moments like that in the film that really just bring me back and engross me and make me love the certain elements of the film. I will not say that I love the film as a whole, but certain parts of the film are nothing short of fantastic in my opinion. And the prophetic nature of the film about bringing balance to the Force is something that I feel fits really well with the mystical nature of the Force and this whole thing of the Jedi that was set up in past films. And now bringing about this prophecy, I think, really adds well to that sense of mystery and the mythical and legendary nature of the Jedi and of the Force is something that I found really interesting. Even right after that moment, you know, of course, the fear leading to anger, to hate, and to suffering is another really interesting theme that is introduced. But even with the political thing, when they pass the no confidence motion, there's a lot of intensity that does build up from that moment in the film, and I think it really just moves on through the course of this film and builds up to what I believe is a really exciting finale. I feel like it's a really well intercut finale. While people do have complaints about there being 4 different things going on, and of course not everything being at the same level of excitement, I think it's still really well intercut. Of course, I mean, I was most engrossed in the Jedi duel, which is one of the things that almost everyone agrees is the most amazing duel. And a lot of people talk about it being, you know, choreographed and visibly choreographed. I thought more than anything else, it showed the reflexes that, of course, were alluded to earlier on, and the quickness of it really added to the intensity and managed to help introduce that operatic element when the music really kicks in, and it all just tying together was so brilliant. Even that wide shot where Obi-Wan is just hanging off a ledge while Qui-Gon and Darth Maul fight, it's a beautiful shot, and there's some amazing mind-blowing shots in this film. Furthermore, there's of course where you have Natalie Portman's character Queen Amidala and everyone in that shootout with the droids, which is not as exciting, nor is the Gungan fight, and I will admit some of the CGI with the Gungans isn't particularly well executed, especially that of Jar Jar Binks. But even the Naboo starships destroying the control base for the droids was an interesting setup and something that really closed out an important arc of Anakin. I think him, you know, just being away from home and him being sent away from going from the slave child to one of the saviors of the galaxy, like 0 to 100, and very quickly, it still felt like something kind of possible, since they did introduce the fact that there was something special about the child. And really all of this coming together in what I believe is an incredible finale that was intense, that yes, some of the jokiness, I will obviously acknowledge the faults that the Phantom Menace has. There's unnecessary amounts of humor, there's weird kinds of humor, of course. The love story felt rather odd. There is a certain imbalance in terms of, you know, some storylines being less interesting or more interesting than others, but that does not take away from what I believe that ultimately it was a film that culminated in a really exciting final act and a really exciting you know, ending to what sets up for future films, but at the same time manages to do a good job of really closing out everything that still took place in this film with incredible amounts of foreshadowing, and what I believe, especially in 1999 and even today, is an achievement from a technical standpoint. It's a film that has those moments that certainly elevate the film far above any of its faults for me. Those moments that I called Spielbergian earlier for some reason, but those moments wherein, you know, Obi-Wan is against all odds and you're rooting for him. And I personally was rooting for Obi-Wan. I was devastated when Qui-Gon Jinn had been slayed, and him jumping up and destroying Darth Maul. Just moments like that, you know, where your back's against the wall and everything is stacked against you. And a lot of those moments happening through the course of the film. Obviously not all of them working when you're not necessarily rooting for the characters, but I felt really attached to Obi-Wan's character, to Qui-Gon's character, and it was moments like that that really made this film a whole other experience. And while yes, you're fair to dislike it, and you're fair and you're not wrong to hate on this film, personally I'm a big fan of the Phantom Menace, and I'm gonna give the Phantom Menace a yes.